good luck to all the translators translating poetry on the fly. And I always remember I was at a huge conference in Prague just after the Berlin Wall came down. Half the people there were from the West and half were from the previously Iron Curtain countries. And the atmosphere was so intoxicating on the first evening, and I was part of the opening plenary. But I walked on stage and I felt as if I'd drunk half a bottle of whiskey because the atmosphere was so astonishing. And I started speaking in different languages and reciting different poems in Spanish and German and English. And apparently one of the translators just said, "You're on your own now." But, poetry is language against which we have no defenses. It's the ultimate kind of verbal invitation, and that's why it's so difficult to translate. You need to take time to find the language against which there are no defenses to bring it into another language. But I want to work with the whole phenomenology of conversation in a way. And phenomenology is just a fancy philosophical way of saying what happens along the way when you try to have one, and when you try to deepen a conversation. So I'm really interested in why it's so difficult to have deep and lasting and courageous conversations. And I'm really interested in what we're afraid of. Yeah. I'm really interested in the trepidation we feel before having the conversation, the falling apart we feel in the middle of the conversation, and the astonishing reconstitution that occurs after the meeting. Yeah. And I'm really interested in the conversational nature of reality, the fact that all life comes from one thing meeting another. And where you get the most surface area in the biological field is where you get the most life. I worked as a naturalist in the Galapagos Islands for a couple of years, and that is a place that's full of astonishing life. But the richest life is where the land meets the ocean meets the air. Yeah. Those three things together. But then you add cold, oxygen-rich water coming up from below and warm water at the surface meeting. You get those five things together on the western side of Isabella Island, and you get the most astonishing life of all. So I'm really interested in the way we can, as individual human beings, increase our surface area in our meeting, really, and really increase the amplitude of what we've traditionally called the heart, which is really representative of what we care about in the world. And really all of our authentic conversations are around what we care about. And what we don't care about are usually abstracted conversations. But caring also makes us vulnerable. And so one of the ways that we defend ourselves against vulnerability is by not caring. And the hope that there's a path you can take in life where you won't have your heart broken. And we spend enormous amounts of energy trying to find that path. and we can't find it anywhere, really. Romantic relationship, of course, is the classic place to have your heart broken. We all know that one. Marriage and commitment is a place to have your heart broken. Parenting. There's never been a mother or father that hasn't had their heart broken at one time or another by their child. Yeah? And they don't even have to do anything spectacular. But usually they do something spectacular. But all they have to do is leave the house when they're 18 and go and not need you anymore to break your heart. Yeah? All they have to do is be disappointed where you can't, as a parent, do anything about their disappointment in life. Yeah? Because it's also your disappointment. Yeah? And then if you care about your work, then you should at one time or another not know how to proceed with your work. You should not know how to go on or how to be in order to carry it. It should, if you're sincere, break your heart at times. Yeah? And it's the breaking of our heart, of our previous defended need to know everything identity that actually starts to make us more conversational. Yeah. So I'll start with a piece. This is a morning piece, actually. I'll recite it because my body is still actually in the morning, having come from the west coast of the United States. But it's really a waking up poem. And I'll often recite this to myself. I wrote it one Easter morning, actually. And I wrote it for a good friend of mine who passed away. I mentioned him on stage. Passed away at the same age as Bede's partner, Jess, there, 52. And John, who I lost, I'm a poet philosopher. He was a philosopher poet, so we were like two bookends, yeah. And we used to have these philosophical weekends. We'd book into a country house hotel somewhere. We would eat and drink and talk and argue and push each other, for the whole weekend. And I always thought, because he was a priest for 17 years, I always thought he would say the last words over me, actually, rather than the other way around. So it was an absolute shock when he went. There's always a question of where are you now, yeah? And what are you doing and why did you go? Yeah. No matter what we believe in, we actually instinctively ask those questions of why did you need to go, where are you now? Yeah. And one of the, I will get to the poem, by the way. One of the astonishing dynamics is that the conversation still goes on, yeah? And the conversation actually matures, as I said last night. And you mature, and actually the other person seems to mature too in the invisible, other imaginative world where you have them. And you can still fall into arguments, actually. And some of the arguments are very satisfying because you can bring the argument to an end when you want and have the last word, whereas you never could, when they were alive. Yeah, so. But one of the legacies and conversations he left me with were a lot of talks and commitments that he was supposed to have given, yeah, but he passed away so shockingly quickly. And so I was invited to inherit a lot of these talks. They'd say, we've got 1,000 people and the hall is booked, can you come and talk for John? And I inherited a talk on Jesus, which was interesting. And but the most fascinating one was this talk in Toronto, and it was the making how to create a more beautiful mind. And I remember looking out at the clouds as I was flying to Toronto and thinking, how do you create a more beautiful mind? Yeah. And then I started to use the word shape. How do you shape a more beautiful mind? And I said, it is true, actually, because just like you can start to learn a musical instrument and get better and better on it every day, all of our great contemplative traditions say that there's a way of inhabiting your mind in a more beautiful way, a more generous way, a more conversational way, and a more invitational way. Yeah. And so, and by the time I landed in Toronto, I'd come to the conclusion that the way you shape a more beautiful mind is through asking increasingly beautiful questions. And I'd said to myself, okay, David, what's the definition of a beautiful question? So I wrestled with that for a while. And I said to myself, a beautiful question is one that shapes your identity as much by asking it as by having it answered. Yeah. It makes you larger. Yeah. It makes you present. Yeah. You can ask the question, who is my daughter, in a way that's incredibly attentive to the daughter that you have. Yeah. Instead of ascribing a name to them, or a name you'll hope they'll live out, you can ask in a beautiful way, who is my daughter? Yeah. You can ask it in a marriage, who is my husband, my wife, my partner, in a deeply attentive way. We stop naming the world in small ways, and we start to pay attention in a way that opens it up. So this is a piece I wrote for John. Every Easter he used to, the one morning of the year when he'd get up early in the year was Easter morning, and he would lead a mass for 1,000 people at this wonderful ruined monastery called Corcomroe Abbey. And I'd often be 10 o'clock at night on the west coast of the States thinking of him getting up at 6 in the morning and leading this mass. And he was incredibly articulate, you know. And he had a bird of paradise vocabulary. It was just astonishing. If you can ever listen to any of his recordings, it's really marvelous. John O'Donoghue. But there came the year when he was no longer there, the first Easter, you know? And so I wrote this piece for him, and I suppose for myself too, but it was about greeting the morning. The blessing of the morning light to you. He was a fantastic blesser too. If you wanted a blessing, you went to John. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May you hold that shadow to the light and the silence of that shadow to the word of the light. May you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. Speaking of invisible appearances, could I ask you not to record? Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. We all know that dynamic of walking into a room full of people, and the person who everyone is greeting is not the person who is actually there. It's a surface, yeah. It's a person who's quite often hiding the real conversation that's occurring inside them. Yeah. And I often think that one of the great disciplines of a human life is opening up that road between how you are at the deepest level inside you and how you are in the outer world, without being indulgent about it, you know, without overwhelming other people, but actually holding that conversation, having faith in whatever you're experiencing or feeling, and dwelling with it in silence to begin with, and then in that silence and that dwelling, finding language that will hold what you're speaking, what you're going through, and where you'd like to go in your life. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May you hold that shadow to the light and the silence of that shelter to the word of the light. May you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. I often say poetry is also the art of overhearing yourself say things you didn't want to know. Thank you very much. And one of the things I overheard myself saying there, you say things from which you cannot retreat. Yeah? And when I reread those lines that I'd just written around, may you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. I said, isn't that true? How many disappearances have I been through, actually? Yeah. When you think of it, 1/2 of existence is about disappearance. There's no part of the biological world that doesn't go through first, as it's called, incipience, hiddenness, yeah, then emergence, then effulgence, and then it starts to fade and disappear until it goes back into its own secret re-emergence again. Yeah. And this is deeply in our bodies and in our psyches. Yeah. The moon disappears for 3 days and 3 nights every month of the year. Yeah. And all of our great mythologies are full of this 3 days and 3 nights. Yeah. When the children are taken out into the woods, to be killed by the forester, they're let go because he can't go through it, and they're 3 days and 3 nights in the woods. Yeah. And of course, it's there in the Christian tradition, 3 days and 3 nights of the resurrection. Yeah. And in the belly of the whale, 3 days and 3 nights. Beowulf wrestling with Grendel's mother, 3 days and 3 nights. It's the part of the cycle where you do not know what is happening, actually. And if you did know something, it would be the wrong thing. And if you did go off in a new direction, it would be the wrong direction. If you did say something, it would be the wrong thing. You're not supposed to know, actually. So 1/2 of the natural world actually sustains itself generation to generation by going through phases of disappearance. But we look at that and we say, listen, God. Whether you believe in God or not, you say, listen, God. That's all very well, but I just want the first half of the equation, please. Yeah? I'm just going to be here when I'm on the up and up. When things are fading away, I'm going to turn my face away, close my eyes, not look. I don't want to be here, and wake me up when things are on the up and up. Which means that most people are at war with reality 50% of the time. But it's lovely and merciful to look back over your life and think of how many disappearances you've been through in order to be the present person you are. Your 15-year-old would not recognize who you'd become. They certainly wouldn't recognize your fashion sense. They would say, you are not me, you'd never catch me dead wearing those things you're wearing there. Yeah. And most of those disappearances we went through reluctantly. We were dragged into them. It felt like our world was falling apart. So a beautiful question in that piece for me was, what would it be like to actually go through those disappearances voluntarily? To actually pay enough attention to know when things are beginning to disappear. Your life as you know it, the names you've given to things and to people and to your work, they're all actually starting to subvert themselves and disappear. I do think, in every life there's a dynamic of impersonation that starts to occur. And the impersonation is incredibly subtle because you actually start impersonating yourself. You build, and you spend a lot of time building a certain kind of identity. And suddenly you start to get the new seasonality coming in where that identity is actually no longer real, no longer quite as relevant as it was. It's starting to disappear. But it's so disturbing to us that we won't look. So we carry on, and at times, even our friends can't tell that we're impersonating ourselves. Until suddenly you become this husk, actually, around nothing at all inside you. And that's when you have to stop and reinvent yourself. And quite often we go through transformation by, I often think most people are a good 7 to 10 years behind the actual threshold of maturation that they're on now. And you only catch up with yourself when you hit reality at great velocity. And you break apart on impact when you hit it, yeah. And then you go through the transformation by putting yourself back together again. Yeah? And this is an ancient, time-honored mode of human transformation. But what would it be like if you actually started earlier in the process, yeah? And didn't need to go through the trauma and shock and breaking apart? Yeah? Of course, there are many things in life where there's no choice except for shock, you know, the loss of someone close to you. But there are many times where we can catch something much earlier in the process. Yeah? You start to pay attention to the seasonality of existence, to what's talking to you and what's starting to invite you into the new life. I remember having this experience myself as an artist, you know, on stage, speaking, reciting. I have hundreds of poems memorized, my own and others, and I have a repertoire of stories. Yeah, but there was just one time where I walked off stage and I realized that I was just a simulacrum of myself. Yeah, I was impersonating myself. Yeah. But the sense of contact with the future had gone, yeah? And the sense of being surprised and the sense of invitation had disappeared. And it's always a diagnostic that you need to stop. Yeah? You just need to stop the conversation. And I always say the first step in deepening any conversation is to stop the one you're having now, actually. Yeah? And so I went to my desk afterwards when I got home, and I said, right, David, I said, you've got all of these stories you've been telling and you're so familiar with them. I said, what's a story you've never told? Yeah. What's the story you've never told? And and I suddenly had this image of this page in a book of Native American stories that I'd been given by an auntie of mine. It was a beautiful book. It had a gorgeous aroma from the pages. I remember the smell of the ink and the pages. And I used to put it out on the kitchen floor, and I'd have one knee up and one down, and I'd be looking at the book. You know, and there was all of these Native American stories from different parts of America. And I was really caught. My imagination was really caught. But my favorite one was of a child being taught how to cross a piece of broken ground in the forest without making a sound. And most of us would have come across that image as children. And I was so caught by it, and I'd go out and practice my non-existent Native American skills in the local woods, you know, in Yorkshire where I grew up. And I probably sounded like a mastodon, you know, coming through the bed. To me, I was that child, you know, going across the twigs. And I said, that's fascinating, that I would actually get that image. I said, what's that? Why were you so caught by that? What threshold in your imagination were you crossing as a child, actually? Yeah. So I wrote this piece out of it, and it's called Sometimes. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound. You come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. To stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. Suddenly I was back at the frontier. And the invitation, the life frontier, the invitation over that frontier, over that horizon was to work with the question that had no right to go away. And it's a great diagnostic of the courageous conversation you need to have, is the question that has no right to go away. The question that has no right to go away is the one you don't want to answer, actually. And the conversation you don't want to have is, by definition, the courageous conversation. In fact, you've only to ask yourself, what's the conversation I don't want to have? And that's the conversation you need to have, yeah. The interesting thing about that conversation is you can turn your face away. One of the marvelous things about being human, and the tragic thing too, is that we can refuse to have the conversation. We may be the only part of the created universe that can refuse to have the particular conversation it was born for. Yeah. We can turn our face away. Yeah. But when we do that, everything seems to go into neutral. Things stop making sense, yeah, at a very core level. But because things have stopped making sense at a core level, your strategic naming mind starts to make things up around what's meaningful for you. And you start to substitute artificial goals for one that originally was very precious, very close to your heart, and one you really cared about. So this can occur inside an individual human heart, the refusal to turn your face towards the conversation that has no right to go away. But it can also occur in a marriage too, or a relationship. Both people can refuse to have the conversation they need to have. But when they do that, the relationship goes into neutral. Things stop making sense. You start to lose your future together too, your shared future. The other person stops seeming real, and you stop seeming real, all at the same time. Yeah. And of course, it can happen in a community of people working together in an organization. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place, beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. That was the frightening line in that. That was the line I didn't want to overhear. It's not a passive process to live a life with just a surface conversation. You're actually shaping an identity while you do it. We'll often live the life of contingency, especially in work. We'll say, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed now, but when I get to the weekend, I'll give myself a break. Yeah. And then you work straight through the weekend, of course. But you say, I need a different job. This isn't my right work. Oh, but I got the kids to get through school, I've got to pay for the car, I've got my lifestyle, I've got this, I've got that, so I'll do it when I have enough money in the bank. Yeah? I'll do it when I reach a certain level of safety in the organization. I'll do it when I retire. And finally you say, I'll do it when I'm dead. When I've got the whole thing out of the way. Yeah? So it's the life of contingency. Yeah? So to live a life where you're not fully present is not a passive thing to do. You're getting actually further and further away from what you want because you're actually shaping an identity that is imprisoning you away from what you want. So by the way you are on the phone, on the email, at your desk, with other people, who are you practicing at becoming? It's interesting, we spend 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day in work, in this community of people anyway. And imagine if you practiced a musical instrument for the same amount of time that you work. If you practice the flute, or the piano, or the trumpet, flugelhorn, the violin, you would become very good very quickly if you practice 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And it wouldn't matter if you had any musical proclivity at all to begin with, you'd become a fantastic trumpeter if you practiced 7 or 8 hours a day. So, who are you practicing at becoming in the hours of your day? There's nowhere else that you're practicing so assiduously at becoming someone. So the first step is stopping the conversation, not for the puritanical sake of it, but to get down to another level, to drink from a deeper well, to get closer to the pivot point of meaning inside us. Yeah. First step is stopping the conversation. The second one, almost by definition, is a relationship with the unknown and with silence. Otherwise, you won't be able to stand not knowing. Yeah. So in that first poem, there's this sense of opening up your senses to pay attention to the world in such a way that the world comes to find someone at a much deeper level inside you. This is very deeply in the Zen tradition. Dogen Zenji in the 12th century said, if you go out and confirm the 10,000 things, this is delusion. If you name things, Latin names for all the birds, and you're good at this, and you're bad at that, and I'm indifferent at that, and I give names to everything. This is delusion. Yeah. If the 10,000 things come and confirm, if the 10,000 things come and confirm you, this is enlightenment. If you allow things to announce their own name. Sounds very simple, but we don't realize until we spend real time in silence with ourselves, how much we're trying to coerce the world around us every second of the day. How much we're actually not listening to another person's voice. We're actually just waiting for a gap in their conversation so that we can fire something off. We have an invisible pile of ammunition by our side. You wait for a space, you fire off another piece, and then conversation's over when the ammunition pile is gone. That's not a conversation. The blessing of the morning light to you, may it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. We often think of horizons outside of ourselves, but it's interesting to think that all of us have a horizon inside of us, inside ourselves too. Yeah. A horizon is defined by the fact that there's something over it which you can't see. Yeah. That is the definition of a horizon. Yeah. And horizons in a human life have always been incredibly inspiring. And now we're finding out through medical research that the ability to actually look at horizons changes our physiology, actually, and puts us into a better and healthier relationship to the world. So if you start looking at far horizons, you will actually feel physiologically better. And we all know that experience. That's why we want the view. Yeah, the room with the view. Yeah. But it's interesting to think that all of us have a horizon inside us too, beneath which we don't seem to be able to go. That horizon is often marked by a feeling of immobility inside us. Something I actually rub up against, something I know represents a line between what I know about myself and what I don't know. But it's interesting the way that we turn away from that inner horizon rather than gaze at it or spend time with it, actually. And all of our great contemplative traditions, especially the Zen tradition, has you experiencing that inner line between what you know about yourself and what you don't know, as a kind of symmetry with the horizon outside in your world. The ability to actually go to that line of immobility, dwell in it, and then actually feel it start to move and change into something else. This is where we start to feel nourished by what all of our great traditions have called inner sources. Yeah. But in order to get down to this line inside us, quite often you have to stop a certain conversation that's going on in the outer world. Yeah. So this is a piece I wrote about stopping a conversation in the outer world, and it's called To Break a Promise. And I was coming towards the end of it was between my marriages, and I was in relationship with a woman. And it was one of those relationships that's not quite good for you. Yeah? You need one between each marriage. Yeah? But I got to that, I got to the place where I suddenly realized something needed to change. And luckily I was on the edge of Connemara at this gorgeous ruined monastery, different than the one I mentioned earlier. This one's dedicated to Saint Fehan, and it's in the little town of Kong. Kong has these rivers and streams running everywhere, and there are wildfowl and herons and trout and salmon leaping everywhere. It's really a remarkable place, and the river runs right by the monastery. And one of my favorite architectural structures in the world is there, and it hangs out over the river on pillars. And it's what I call a fishing cottage, because it was in the shape of a cottage with a sloped roof and a chimney at one end. But in the floor there was a slot, stone slot. You can still see it there. Yeah? And the monks used to go in and drop a net down the slot. And apparently they had a bell attached to it. And when the bell rang, you had a trout or a salmon there. But when I lead my walking tours in the west of Ireland, I often take people there and I give a talk in the place. Yeah. But before I took people there, I was in there by myself on this winter's day towards the end of this relationship. And I was in there for 45 minutes or so. And the lovely thing about the structure is that the wall facing downstream has fallen away into the river, and the roof is gone. So you've got the sky, and you've got the river running, and you're looking downstream. So the whole architecture is asking you to look at what's already gone. Because when you're looking at a river, you're actually looking at something that's already passed. Yeah? You give a name to something, but actually it's already on its way. Yeah? And I was there for 45 minutes, and I said, what's already gone? And I realized that my commitment to this relationship had gone, actually. But I also realized at the same time that I'd made a promise in the relationship. And the interesting thing was, I had never said the promise out loud. But it was so strong that I might as well have shouted it from the rooftops. Yeah? But I didn't find it until I was there. Yeah? And then I said to myself, beautiful question, shaping of a beautiful mind. I said, how do you break a promise? How do you let a promise go? And I said to myself, you know, all of our great religious traditions are full of how you make promises. But actually, human beings need to break promises as much as they need to make them. You think, for instance, about the promise you make over a newborn baby in a cradle. Whether you're the father or the mother, or you're an auntie or an uncle or a godfather or godmother. The promise you make over a newborn infant is absolute protection. Nothing's going to happen to you on my watch. I'm going to protect you. Yeah? That's a real promise in the season of its time. It's a necessary promise. Yeah? But if you kept to that promise when they were 15 years old, you'd ruin their lives entirely. Yeah? And probably you needed to start to give that promise away 7 years before that. But it's amazing how we'll still be there at 15 trying to offer 15 years later. Caught and imprisoned as the child is by the promise that is outworn. So this is the experience I had in that fishing cottage. And you can look online and see it, actually. It's a gorgeous place. And the experience, and this is the piece, the giving away of the promise, the breaking away. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. We don't do this lightly here. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. No fuss now. Just lean into the white brightness and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple and as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the river running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another, the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise in the world, with every other promise the world has ever made. Now let them go on. Let the promise go with the river. Stand up, walk away, have faith. There was something very practical about that line, actually, when I said have faith. It was really have faith that if the promise is still there, you won't be able to give it away, actually. It will come back to you. Yeah? Or it will come back changed. Yeah? But actually, if you've spent 45 minutes on a freezing cold January day in a monastic fishing cottage, it's probably because you need to give the promise away. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. No fuss now. Just lean into the white brightness and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple and as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the water running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another, the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise the world has ever made. Now let them go on. Let your words have their own life without you. Let the promise go with the river. Stand up, walk away, have faith. So it'd be a lovely, disturbing and invitational question for you to ask yourselves when you left the room here. What's a promise I need to break in my life right now? Not because there was anything wrong with it when I first made it. It's just the world and I, and often the person or the place or the organization to which I made the promise, has moved on. Stopping the conversation then immediately puts us into the unknown. And it's only when you're in the unknown that you realize how you're constantly calling on a part of the mind that needs to know everything. And again, all of our great contemplative traditions ask us to look at the way the naming strategic mind, which is necessary for our evolution, which is constantly fretting and worrying and constantly assigning temporary names that it then makes permanent, is the cause of much of our woe. Because we actually take it as the pivot point of our identity, rather than dropping down to another, more pivotal, silent source at the center of the pattern and constellation of events around us, from which we can then speak and name temporarily, but where we don't hold the world hostage to those names. So I'll just take you further south from Connemara, across Galway Bay into North Clare, and to one of my favourite places in the world called Tubber Fodric, or the Well of Patrick in Irish. It's an ancient source. It's a holy well or blessed well, and there are thousands of them all over Ireland. They used to be all over Britain too, actually, but they were suppressed and covered over with the dissolution of Catholicism and the monastic tradition here in the 1530s. But actually they go back to a much more ancient human religious instinct. Many of the wells which are called St. Catherine's or St. Bridget's or St. Patrick's, 2,000 years ago they would have had a different name from the beliefs that were held by the people who were in this country at that time. But all over the world, whether it's Africa or Australia or Asia or South America, the place where water runs through even the driest summer is always seen as representative of an equivalent inner source inside a human being. The ability to drop down to this horizon of what seems like immobility inside us, down into the unknown below it. Just wondering whether to take you somewhere else or something, but I know I'll stay with Tubber Fodric. Tubber means a well in Irish, and there's another Irish word called lobber, and you have to make sure you don't get your lobbers and your tubbers mixed up. Lobber is a place where someone lived, someone special, a saint or a druid or a Celtic goddess or something. It's named after them. But I've always felt at Tubber Fodric this ability to go into deep silence. And on my Irish walking tour every year, as soon as people have eaten and then they know where they're staying in the cottages, we all jump in these minibuses I rent. We go up to Fodric. We walk along this green road above Galway Bay. You can see Connemara off in the distance. And if you're lucky, the sun's out going down over Galway Bay, like in the words of the song. And then there's a little break in the wall there along the green road, and up amongst the rocks you find this well. And there's a little arm of rock, and then there's a niche above it. And almost always there are notes for people who've been suffering or who have passed away. Last time I was there was a photograph of a young 15-year-old lad, who'd passed away from cancer, and a note from his auntie. And there's often coins, and there's a place where people go when they need to go to some deep place that their everyday surface conversation is not addressing. And we go up there and we spend time in silence around the well, and I have 2 Irish friends who sing there. And then we go into the silence, then I'll often recite this piece. It's called Toba Fodric. I was a good dozen years going up there before I felt I understood what the invitation was in this place. And when you think about it, we can talk about the conversational nature of reality. You can just as well talk about the invitational nature of reality. Everybody has a certain form of invitation that they're making just by walking into a room. And this is really powerful in leadership. You get a new job as a boss and you walk into that place, everyone unconsciously is looking at you to see what invitation you're going to make to them. And one of the most existentially disappointing dynamics in work life is when you find out there's absolutely no invitation at all, except for you to go away so that they can get their work done, which is no invitation at all. I'm an artist, I'm not a leader, but by perforce accident, I've become a leader because I've had an organization which is accreted around my work. So I've got all these lovely people, 7 or 8 people. So I'm not a great leader because my first priority is my artistry. But the way I stay on the edge is to constantly ask, what's the invitation I need to be making to the whole collective at any one time, but also to individuals. I go through my mind and say, with each person, and say, what invitation is that person actually asking of me? And what's the invitation I want to make to them? And that is a really powerful driver of a real conversation. But you can ask it in a relationship too, in the kitchen, of your spouse, your partner. One of the great tragedies in any intimate relationship is when you stop making invitations to one another. And you stop feeling a shared invitation to the future. The same horizon that you put together yourselves actually is no longer extant in the same way. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Be impatient with easy explanations. Be impatient with easy explanations, and teach that part of the mind that wants to know everything not to begin questions it cannot answer. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. This is a phrase an Irish friend of mine uses when he doesn't want to have a certain conversation with someone. I'll say, did you have that talk with your neighbor about the boundary of your farm last night down in the pub? And he'll say, no. I say, what happened? He'll say, I just turned sideways into the light and disappeared. all know that. And there are some conversations you're not meant to be there for. You just turn sideways into the light. You're not found. Kind of stealth technology. You don't appear on the conversational radar screen, therefore, very ancient defense of the masculine psyche, I might say. So this is a series of invitations I'm making myself to go to this deeper level. I'll finish with this piece and we'll open it up to some conversation. We've really only worked with the first 2 elements of 7 elements that I work with for deepening the conversation, which is the first 2 here, which is stopping the conversation you're having now and making a friend of the unknown. Those are the first 2 elements. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Be impatient with easy explanations and teach that part of the mind that wants to know everything not to begin questions it cannot answer. Walk the green road above the bay and the low glinting fields. Let that Atlantic gleam be ahead of you and the grey light of the bay below until you catch, down on your left, the break in the wall. For just above in the shadows, you'll find it hidden. A curved arm of rock holding the water close to the mountain. A just lit surface smoothing a scattering of coins. And in the niche above, notes to the dead and supplications for those who still live. But for now, you are alone with the transfiguration. And ask no healing for yourself, but look down as if looking through time, as if looking through a rent veil from the other side of the question you've refused to ask. From the other side of the question you've refused to ask. And you remember now that clear stream of generosity from which you drank. How as a child your arms could rise and your palms turn out to take the blessing of the world. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Your strategic mind does not know what to do with that invitation, but your imagination knows exactly what it means, actually. If you're in a rough bar in the back streets of Liverpool and you tell someone to disappear into the originality of it all, you're in trouble. But the faculty of belonging inside you, the part that's serious about its life, you could call that the soul. It's the part of you that's trying to belong to the world in the greatest way it can. And the soul is incredibly disturbing to the strategic mind, because you could say that that faculty inside us, that soul, would much rather fail at its own life than succeed at someone else's. And that's very disturbing to the way we've categorized what it means to be successful as a human being. Turn sideways into the light, as they say the old ones did, and disappear into the originality of it all. Be impatient with easy explanations. It's lovely, just spend an hour around Oxford walking and just watch how your mind is constantly naming things and constantly going through all the things it knows about everything and all the names it has for everything too. St. Mary's Spire, oh yes, I know that. Founded in 1150 or whatever it is. And, how difficult it is to walk around with a clear mind, ready to be surprised by things and by people. And teach that part of the mind that wants to know everything not to begin questions it cannot answer. Walk the green road above the bay and the low glinting fields. Let that Atlantic gleam be ahead of you and the grey light of the bay below until you catch, down on your left, the break in the wall. For just above in the shadows, you'll find it hidden. A curved arm of rock holding the water close to the mountain. A just lit surface smoothing a scattering of coins. And in the niche above, notes to the dead and supplications for those who still live. But for now, you are alone with the transfiguration. You are alone with the and ask no healing for yourself, but look down as if looking through time, as if looking through a rent veil from the other side of the question you've refused to ask. And you remember now that clear stream of generosity from which you drank, how as a child your arms could rise and your palms turn out to take the blessing of the world. So, a little lightning raid on questions that have no right to go away. Questions that shape our identity. And questions that shape a more beautiful identity the more we pay attention to them and live them out. And the way everything is inviting us over thresholds of understanding and maturity, actually, and quite often thresholds of generosity as individual human beings. My sisters sat by the deathbeds of hundreds and hundreds of people, actually, as a nurse, and it's always the lack of generosity that a person regrets. It's always where they didn't give, and they could have given. That's the measure of their existence at the end of it all. So, we've got a few minutes for a little badinage, a little conversation. Anyone who has any thoughts? Or
Yeah, thank you. I'm struggling with the idea of letting go of promises. And I'm wondering if you see any difference between letting go of a promise or trying to fulfill a promise you've made in a different way based on circumstance. And what you said that really hit me was thinking about having two godchildren who I made that promise to their parents.
yeah,
To protect them and to do everything in my power. And that's not a promise I can imagine letting go. But practically, it just informs, I think, the way, now that they're in their 20s, the promise still seems valid.
yeah,
And yet I recognize I can't be with them or put them in a padded room to protect them.
yeah.
So I'm trying to understand if there's a way to hold your promise, but just live into it or fulfill it differently as you change and they change.
Yeah. Well, I think you articulated it yourself. You worked your way into the question yourself, actually. Yeah. And,
Then never mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's we only let go of a promise when it's already gone, like the river, and almost always it can also be transformed and be completely new. But even asking the question makes you more present to those godchildren, because we often will say, I don't know how to answer that question, therefore it's just complete neglect. You don't treat them as godchildren anymore, because I don't go towards that line of immobility of the unknown. I won't allow myself to ask the question and not know how to do it. Yeah. And it also leads, one of the elements is taking the path of vulnerability. It also leads to the beautiful vulnerability of you speaking to them and saying, what would it look like for me to be a real godfather to you now that you're in your 20s? And they probably laugh and not know, because they hadn't thought about it either, but it would send them away thinking about it. I had this lovely moment with my daughter when she was in her teens. She's 26 now, but those lovely adolescent moments, And part of the difficulty of being a parent or an adolescent is the curve of transformation is so steep, in an adolescent, that you're almost always relating to someone who's actually no longer there. So it's like talking to the cat, And they feel like you're talking to the cat. So the person you wanted them to be, and And you've also gone through that transformation from being the son-like God at the center of their affections, to a walking embarrassment, as soon as you come into the room. So all of those wonderful. But we were in this wonderful adolescent parent conversation, which soon got very animated and very passionate. And then suddenly she's banging up the stairs, as hard as she can. And I'm following her up. I've got my hand raised, to talk to her. And then I'm stood there on the stairs with my hand like this and my mouth open, about to say that next really unhelpful thing, which you've earned the right as a parent to say. And her door slams, the whole house reverberates, And I caught myself there and I said, "Wait a minute, David," I said. "This is not a real conversation." I said. How do you make the conversation real? Take some of your own advice that you spread around the planet, at such great expense. I said, "First of all, stop the conversation you're having now. No, don't reframe it. Don't re-engineer it. Don't, just stop it." So I pulled my hand down, shut my gob, turned round, and I went into the kitchen, and I just started making tea. And I got my mother her grandmother's teapot and set, the blue Delft that she used to have, and I was just instinctively making this tea, and I put together this beautiful tray and the chocolate digestives and everything, and then finally when I had cooled down, I walked back up, and in a more invitational voice, I knocked on the door and said, "Charlotte, I'm sorry for my part of it. Come down, let's have tea together." And so actually she came out, but she came out with that wonderful adolescent body language, where the head's down and but then they walk down like this. And she sat and I went in and I said, "Now don't say anything, David. Don't have any ideas. Don't have." And anyway, she sat down with her head down and the arms folded. But I noticed one eye was on the chocolate biscuit. "That's my chance," I said, yeah. And but we sat there for the longest time, and then out of nowhere, out of this silence, I just heard myself saying, "Charlotte," I said, "tell me one thing you want me to stop doing as a father, and tell me one thing you want me to do more of." And she looked up, and we were immediately there in a proper conversation. Yeah. And she knew immediately the one thing I needed to stop doing. In fact, she had a few dozen things, yeah. But it was interesting that she didn't know what she wanted me to do more of. And she said, "I'll have to go away and think about that, Dada," she said. And suddenly we were back in a relationship in the future together, a future horizon. Yeah. So that was, in many ways, that was the breaking of an old promise, or the letting go of one, and the renewal of a new one. Yeah. The thoughts, yeah.
Thank you so much. Do you have a ritual for your previous?
Do I have it? I can hear you. Yeah, I'll repeat it. Go on. Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're going to be translated into 50 languages now.
My question is, do you have a ritual for your previous selves, or do you have a grieving ritual, and or are you already moving on?
No, I do. I've got a few pieces I've written to previous selves, yeah. And there's one called Leavening, about the way that previous self was a leavening inside, the leavening you have in bread, that brought about my present life. And a very surprising arrival at the end of the poem, too, of realizing that you look back on your early innocent selves, you have this delusion that you're going to replace innocence with experience. Yeah? But actually, innocence is really the ability to be found anew by the world, constantly. Yeah? So William Blake saw it as a kind of faculty for being present to the future. Yeah? So innocence is the ability to look at the world as if you've seen it for the first time. Yeah? So quite often it's something you have to actually bring back alive in yourself rather than pat you on the back for having replaced your innocence with experience. But the interesting thing is, all of those people are alive in the mirror when you're looking at yourself. You know, the person you were, all the people you've been, the illusion of the person you think you are now, and the person you'd like to be. They all live together. Yeah.
We have 2 minutes.
Go on.
Thank you so much for being with us. Feel lucky to be in this room. And I have to also tell you that I read some of your work in my wedding vows.
Did you?
So thank you for that. Clearly,
Yes.
it's meant a lot.
Hopefully not to break a promise.
Exactly. A promise I hope to keep, yes.
Was it the true love?
No, it's actually on friendship from Constellations.
Oh, lovely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I wonder, you've joined us at a gathering of social change leaders,
Yes.
and I wonder what reflections you might have on the role of poetry in social movements.
Yes.
And I'm sort of thinking of that at 2 levels, both at the level of the self and
Yes.
having the difficult conversations that we've been avoiding with ourselves, but also at the level of sort of moving nations and moving the world.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? Yeah.
2 things. One is, quite often when you're trying to save the world, you often neglect those inner personal sources inside you that are actually really the source of your enthusiasm and what brought you into this work in the first place. So poetry is a way of keeping that memory, not falling into amnesia. Yeah. The second is around language, because there's definitely a jargon and a language, that's in this world, as there is in every corporate world. And it's needed because you need to be able to talk to each other and know that you're talking about the same things. And you have the same thing in science. When I was learning marine zoology, you learn this binomial Latinate Linnaean system, which was put together by the great Swedish naturalist Linnaeus, which is those familiar double-barreled Latin names that we give to birds and animals. But if you use a Latin name about a bird, you can sound very erudite, and you can even sound as if you know what you're looking at. But actually, it tells you nothing about what you're seeing. All that scientific nomenclature allows you to do is to know that you're all talking about the same thing. So poetry is the language that breaks the jargon apart at the surface, and puts you back in touch with the raw song at the center of existence. Then you can come back and know you're using jargon. But you start thinking that the language you're using in the workplace is adequate for you to understand what you're involved with as a human being. So it breaks that delusion apart.
Thank you. Michelle Arevalo from Ecuador. Happy to know that we have the Galapagos in common. I love the discussion about our disappearances and those moments we would rather not look into. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, just the different ways disappearances take shape. You mentioned trauma, grief, but in particular, I'm interested in grief because there was something about a work that you wrote, just like, drinking from the well of grief together with others.
Yeah.
That was very, very supportive. It made grief, like somehow collective grief is just a little bit easier to get over than individual grief. So I wanted to see if you could tease out a little bit about these disappearances and feeling together in community with others who are going these disappearances.
Well, it's a huge question, and this young woman has just put up a big sign saying "end." So So when you're at my next appearance, we'll work with that. But I'll just finish with a piece, which is a beginning piece. And I wrote this. This is called, last night I read the poem Santiago, which is arriving at the end, which is a new beginning. And this is a beginning poem that's also an end point. And it's called For the Road to Santiago. For the road to Santiago, don't make new declarations about what to bring and what to leave behind. For the road to Santiago, don't make new declarations about what to bring and what to leave behind. Just bring what you have. Just bring what you have. You're always going that way anyway. You are always going that way all along. Thank you very much. Yeah.